Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner real estate stories. In this video, a bunch of crazy squatters sold my dead parents' home for $630,000. And it appears that they were actually in the right and I honestly don't know what to do. Here is what happened. So I need to go way back to the house that I grew up in with my parents. They were the type to settle down in a house and never move, so it was the only childhood home I ever knew. Once I got old enough and moved out, my parents stayed in that home and I would go back every holiday to spend it with them. Then my mom died and my dad got sick and things just started to deteriorate from that point. I got busy with work and couldn't visit as often as I wanted to. My dad died a few years later and I went down a pretty bad path after all of it. I drank myself stupid until I ended up in the hospital and got some actual mental health help that I needed in order to get my life back on track. It was not fast though, and before I knew it, 10 years had passed and I was finally stable both mentally and financially in a city 500 miles from where I grew up. While I was off with my problems, some guys saw that my parents' house was empty and decided to take up residence. He was a squatter and I did not know if he was living in the house or doing anything. I don't want to seem too biased, so I'll admit that he was not filling the place with trash or anything. In fact, he fixed a bunch of stuff while he was illegally living in the house. I guess he decided that since he was living there, it meant the house was his and actually filed it under his name with me getting no notice or anything about it. When I went back to my parents' house, I saw that a family was living in it and of course went up to the door, confused since I was their only child and the house should have belonged to me. A nice man opened the door and at first thought I was trying to sell him something or have him convert religions. I guess that is what I deserved for wearing my nice clothing. Me, wait no, I'm not selling anything. This is my house and I don't understand why you are living here. Man, there must be a mistake. We purchased this house and the previous owner's names are on the paperwork. We met him too and he didn't mention another person also owning the house. Me, none of the paperwork mentioned my dad's name? Man, no. Look, let me give you the name of the previous owner and maybe he can clear things up for you. He gave me the name of the squatter and I looked him up and found out where he was currently living. I had some time to think and get angry at this guy for stealing from my parents' house and then running around and getting a profit off of it. I did not know if I wanted to tell him off or try to force him to give me the money that was rightfully mine. I wish I had managed to cool myself down a little bit before speaking to him, but I was all riled up and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Me, did you steal my parents' house? Squatter guy, what? Me, at this address. That was my parents' house and you just stole it and then sold it. I grew up in that house. I had things in there and you had no right to go and sell them. Squatter, the house was abandoned and overgrown when I found it. I'll admit I had nowhere to live and at first started living there, but I fixed the place up and paid for water and electricity and the lawn to get taken care of. You still sold it illegally. You made a profit off of what was mine and not yours. Squatter, no, I got the house registered legally in my name. It had no owner on record for it. So I flipped the house and I saved the stuff for years in case somebody was gonna come and get it, but nobody did. I donated it to charity. I did not make a penny off of your things. Me, aside from my house, I'm getting a lawyer and I'm gonna sue you for everything you have. For the money you made from my house and I'll get the sale reversed and my house back. I got a lawyer and explained to him what happened, that a squatter moved into my property while I was getting my life sorted and then turned around to sell it. We took him to court and I gave him a chance to resolve the situation on his own. To give me the money for the things he gave away and to admit that he sold the house illegally and reversed the sale. He lied to people that he owned the home when he was squatting there. You cannot just steal property and say finders keepers on it. Well, it was at this point I found out he had managed to sell the house for $630,000. With no mortgage or anything, that was an insane amount of profit. From what I heard, he has been using it to buy other cheap or abandoned properties and flip them for even more money, probably pushing poorer people out of a neighborhood once the cost of the homes goes up. At first, things in court were looking good for me, as he was called out for squatting, which is illegal. Even if the space was abandoned, he cannot live in it for free to save some money. He was not poor or homeless or anything either. He had a job and just did it because it was cheaper to steal a house than to rent one. The case started to shift out of my favor once the judge got paperwork showing that he had indeed registered the house in his name. I argued that he couldn't do that since I was the rightful owner as next of kin, and well, it turned out that since my parents never had a will, I was supposed to go to the town with the death certificates and register it in my name. I tried to explain that I didn't know and I was in a bad state after they had died. Well, the judge did not care what I had been through and said that when he sold the house, he was legally the owner of it. Meaning that the sale was legal and he was entitled to the entire profits. As for my things that he donated to charity, the judge blamed me for not trying to get my things immediately after they had died. So this guy had gotten away with stealing the only childhood home that I ever had known and made a profit off of it. I tried to demand that he be arrested for the squatting, but they just gave him a slap on the wrist for it instead. If I had shown up right when he started squatting, then he would have been only this horrible person, but since I was dealing with my own crap, he was now being seen as some great house flipper. I was not satisfied with the results of this and decided to go to the press to tell them about how my house had been stolen. They reported on it, but the squatter and current family living there both refused to give statements about anything. The news could not cause anything to change about the judge's ruling, but I wanted everybody else to know what he did and what kind of person he was. I guess it's the same reason I'm telling all of you my story. I wish I could end this with some good kind of news, but it seems like he won and there's nothing else I can do about it. I know if I try and take the house back, I will get arrested, so the only thing I can do is tell my side of the story. So now I leave things a little up in the air for you all in the comments if you think I was in the wrong or if he stole a house that was rightfully mine and got away with the money. And now we got an update to the story that goes like this. The news story going viral was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, I was grateful that my story was out there, that people knew what kind of person this guy was. On the other hand, the internet can be a cruel place. I received hate mail, people calling me an idiot for letting my parents' house sit empty for so long. Well, anyway, something amazing happened. My phone started ringing and it was not just any calls, it was lawyers. Apparently, my story struck a chord with a lot of people and not just regular folks. There were lawyers who specialized in real estate, probate, and even some big shot lawyers who handled cases for huge corporations. They all said the same thing. Something did not sit right with them about my case. They believed there might be grounds for an appeal, that the judge might have overlooked some crucial details. One lawyer, a kind woman named Miss Jackson, stood out from the rest. She explained that while the squatter might have technically followed the letter of the law in getting the house registered in his name, his initial actions, squatting in an abandoned property, were illegal. This could be considered a form of unjust enrichment, meaning he profited from illegal activity. Miss Jackson took my case pro bono, meaning she would not charge me a dime. She was doing it because she believed in my story, because she knew what happened was not right. We went back to court armed with a new strategy and a renewed sense of hope. The courtroom was packed this time, news vans lined the street outside, their cameras hungry for the outcome. The pressure was immense, but Miss Jackson's calm demeanor kept me grounded. She argued my case passionately, highlighting the squatter's initial illegal act and how it ultimately led to his unjust enrichment. She presented evidence of his other flip properties, suggesting a pattern of exploiting similar situations for profit, and the squatter, now joined by a high-priced lawyer, looked uncomfortable. He tried to defend his actions, claiming he was just trying to improve a dilapidated property, but Miss Jackson dismantled his arguments one by one, exposing the inconsistencies and highlighting the unethical nature of his actions. The judge, a different one this time, listened intently to both sides. I could tell from his expression that he was taking our argument seriously. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. This court finds that while the defendant might have technically followed the procedure for claiming ownership of the property, his initial actions of squatting were illegal. His subsequent actions, including the sale of the property, constitute unjust enrichment. A wave of relief washed over me. The judge then continued, "The court hereby orders the defendant to relinquish all profits made from the sale of the property to the plaintiff, the rightful heir. Additionally, the court will be investigating the defendant's other property acquisitions for any potential legal discrepancies." And then the gavel slammed down, echoing through the courtroom. We won. I won. The following months were a whirlwind. So the squatter was forced to hand over the $630K he made from selling my parents' house. News of the verdict spread like wildfire, prompting investigations into his other property dealings, and it turned out that several of his flips involved similar tactics, taking advantage of legal loopholes and vulnerable individuals. He was eventually charged with multiple counts of fraud and faced a lengthy legal battle. As for me, I used the money to buy back my parents' house. It needed a lot of work, but I did not mind. Every swing of the hammer, every brush stroke of paint felt therapeutic. This was my way of reclaiming a part of my life that was stolen from me. And the next one is a malicious compliance story. So this happened over 3 years ago, and while telling it to my friend, she laughingly said, "Such a malicious compliance." So I just decided to share it here. When I first started my very first corporate job, there was a kitchen full of utensils and fridge and oven and stove and a dishwasher. A full-fledged kitchen for employees to make tea, coffee, heat their meals and even cook. They said I can bring my own glasses and put them there or use the company's, and also there was a woman who was working in the kitchen, let's call her Nilly, since she put rules willy-nilly like a bully. Second day of my job, dear Nilly told me, "Let me remind you that no one should leave their dirty dishes in the sink." I was surprised by the claim since I'm new and I don't know anything. I thought this might be her way of bullying, or it might actually be true. So I smiled and asked if this means that I have to wash my own glasses. She said, "Yes, don't make me repeat it twice, honey." Let me remind you, there's a dishwasher. If she's not cleaning the dishes, her only remaining job is vacuum the office once a week and bring tea and coffee to the chiefs, to the meetings and to managers. So I decided to gather information and wait on it, and apparently Nilly has been working in the company for 20 years and knows the CEO. So she knows how he drinks his tea, how he drinks his coffee, when he drinks them, what he eats with his coffee and tea. She knows all of them. If I know one thing, that is never fight a person with the person who knows how your boss likes his coffee, especially if you are replaceable. So fight was not an option. Cool. I also learned that once a week the CEO brings a bag of fruits to the kitchen to share in the company. Apparently he has a fruit garden and goes there for weekends. And she would take fruits to her house at the end of the day. Old employees knew that. They would take 1 or 2 in the day. That's how I learned this. She said to me I can get one from, but it is hers. So I refused the first time offer, thinking that she bought it, and then learned that it was brought by the CEO. I think she implied that the CEO brought it to her and she was generous enough to share it with us peasants, but this is my interpretation of her statement. So anyway, one thing about me, I look young and naive. I look dumb, as if there's some missing component in my brain. Cue the malicious compliance. From my desk I could partially see the kitchen if I turn around, so on the day of the fruit delivery I was constantly checking the kitchen. When CEO came in, I counted to 30 and went in as well. To wash my glasses, of course, I went in and said hi to everyone. This was my first time seeing CEO, so he said, "You must be new," kindly and respectfully informed who I am, and he told me who he was, and I said, "Sir, I've checked the company before entering and knew him," which he liked. After I turned to wash my dishes, he asked me what I was doing, and I said, "Oh, I was informed that all the staff washed their own dishes." At the same time, our Nilly said I must have mistaken that while laughing and taking the sponge and glasses out of my hand. I said, "But you," as if shocked, and cut myself as if realization hit me, and then smiled like she's my best friend. Of course I didn't stop there. I looked at the fruits. The CEO told me to take some fruits and then added that he brought them to the company so all the staff could enjoy. I haven't said anything, but from my expression, the CEO asked what was wrong. I told nothing and said, "I always thought they were Nilly's since..." Then I just smiled and asked if I can take a plate of them, and with a huge plate of fruit accompanied by a huge smile, I went to my desk, shared them with my team. I don't even like fruit. A couple hours later I went to the kitchen and our dear Nilly told me I had misunderstood things and washing dishes was her job and I shouldn't mistake it again, and added fruits were for everyone to share and I should have taken more if I wanted. I stupidly said, "Oh, I didn't know," and how sorry I am to cause her trouble with a sorry smile. Guess who never had to wash dishes and had fruits to eat every day? If your answer is Cleopatra, probably yes, but also me. Nilly would also bring tea and coffee to me from time to time if someone she served did not want to drink. I would thank her with a huge smile and take it. Apparently she does this to all the employees she likes. And by the way, I called them fruits instead of specifying what they were because the CEO would bring apples, oranges, tangerines, pears, even sweet cherries. I don't remember what was the specific fruit that day. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. So, a few years ago, I inherited my family's old farm from my granddad. It was not a farm anymore, much of the fields got given over to make a pretty sizable forest. This was to try and encourage the deer population. It was not any sort of government-led program, it was just something my great-granddad wanted to do. I spent a lot of summers in those woods and pretty much knew them like the back of my hand. I knew every trail and pretty much every interesting tree, from ones to hide in, building a treehouse on, or were just fun to climb. I never really paid much attention to what was going on at the time, but at some point my granddad gave up the idea of a nature reserve when a small-time logging company brought up the land next to us. These were huge 30 or so acre plots, so when I say neighbor, I use it in the loosest sense. We owned about 8 of these plots that stretched out into a long rectangle, and because the logging company was situated on the far side, they had a long way around to drive. During the course of the events I'm about to divulge to you, I found out that the logging company had been petitioning my granddad to build a road through his land. I cannot blame him for saying no. I feel the need to preserve my family's legacy now that I've inherited the land. Now, these letters came at a frequency that could be described as flat-out harassment. If we had known something of them before, we might have been able to put a stop to it back then, but my granddad was a proud man. When I found out that I had inherited the farm at the will hearing, I was unable to do much about it. At the time, I was working in an international internship at a language school in Japan. I wanted to be a translator, so it would be a couple years before I was able to get back stateside. When I eventually made it back home, I spent a lot of time on the farm and walking the fields and forests. It is amazing the things you forget and how it all comes back to you. I relived some of my summers with my brothers and sisters, and when taking a break from cleaning out the farmhouse. One thing I do remember is the logging trucks that would thunder down the road. We used to love sitting on the roadside getting the truckers to honk their horns and such. I would sometimes be laying in bed at night and watch the headlights of a passing truck cast shadows across my room. After a couple of nights, I realized that the headlights no longer shone through my bedroom window, but rather around the back. I thought nothing of it, maybe I was misremembering. That was until I decided to take a walk around the back forest. It was a warm Sunday afternoon, and I could do with getting out of a dusty cellar for a bit. I never really ventured this far out when I was a kid, and it always felt too far, and even now, it felt like I was wandering too far, but I was also excited to explore a whole new area that was always at my fingertips. It started out well enough, birds chirping away and all, wading along overgrown tails until I noticed the trees thinned out ahead of me. When I got to the small clearing, it turns out to be a road. Not a big road, but not a proper road. It looked like someone had thrown down a lot of tarmac without looking and then drove over it with a truck a few times. I was pretty sure that I was still well within the boundaries of my land, so I decided to follow this random road. Judging by the direction the road went, I pretty much figured where it was going to lead, but nothing could prepare me for what I was about to find along this road. Before I ever got close to the boundaries of my land, I noticed that the trees seemed to thin out ahead of me again. At first, I suspected there was another road ahead, but as I got closer, I realized that the trees vanished altogether, and in their place were stumps. It was not every tree, but for about 50 meters each side of the road, the trees had been completely cleared away, all the way along the crude road to the boundary of my land. Beyond that, the logging company had pretty much cleared away the forest and it was now overgrown meadows. Needless to say, I was furious, and in the morning I phoned up my neighbor and started to demand an explanation. He had the gall to tell me that they had permission from my granddad to build the road and log some of the forest. I knew my granddad would not do that, he loved that forest as much as I do. I knew the guy was bullcrapping, but I could not call him up on it without proof. I told him to stay off my land until he was able to produce proof. Which of course he didn't, so I was forced to do it myself, and I tell you, trying to get anything out of the council is a mind-numbing task that takes an eternity. In the meantime, I pretty much spent my time guarding my land against trespassers. This pretty much meant standing at the side of the road telling the truckers that it was private property and they had to go the long way. They would argue that they've been using this road for years, to which I would reply that they were doing so illegally. Most truckers were good-natured about it. The longer journey meant that they would be getting paid more, and for the few that refused, I had no choice but to let them through. That was until I installed a gate and kept it locked. There was no fence to this gate. I had my neighbor knocking on my door not long after, demanding that I took the gate down. I politely informed him that it was my land, so my road, and I could do what I wanted with it. This set a match under him, and he went off at me. He was still playing the "we had an agreement with your granddad" card, and I still was not buying it. In the end, he had to threaten me with the cops. It would save me a phone call, so I handed him my phone and I told him to do so. No word of a lie, he did. He spoke to the operator on my porch and on my phone and told the cops how I was trespassing on his property. It took a while for the cops to get to us as we lived pretty far out, but about 45 minutes later, they finally showed up. I was thankful because I was getting bored of watching my neighbor pace up and down my drive, ranting at himself, while one cop spoke to my neighbor, or rather got yelled at by a red-faced man. The other one took me inside and he let me explain everything that had been going on. Expecting a simple dispute about walking on another man's property, he was surprised to hear that all I had to say about the road and illegal logging. Things escalated pretty quickly, like really quickly. So the authorities found out that my neighbor had no right to build a road or harvest the trees, which was no surprise at all, but I was surprised when I was asked to be a character witness against my neighbor's logging company. I panicked at first when I read the letter asking me to come down to the station. There were words like fraud and evasion, tax and investigation within it. I soon relaxed when I read the whole thing through properly and realized they wanted me to testify as a witness to my neighbor's criminal activity. I guess they must have found something when they were looking into planning permissions or something, but boy does my neighbor have an egg on his face now. Not only is he facing real jail time, but his logging company has to replace every tree they cut down, not just on my land but his too, and repair the damage caused by the road he illegally built. I laugh when I think about it. I did not even have to do anything. Several months after my neighbor called the cops on me, the council finally got back to me about my granddad selling some of his land, and apparently he did sell a bit of it off. I guess that is where he got the money for my sister's inheritance. And the next one is titled Neighbor Gets Towed in the End. I live next to a large, busy four-way stop sign in a residential area. There's been a car that does burnouts and donuts for the past year and a half. At first it was just burnouts once every few months, and he does it at the four-way stop until the air is filled with smoke and then he screeches off. It is loud and disruptive, but nothing we can do since cops don't come and he is gone by the time they do. It is extremely infuriating since I work from home and have meetings. He does this at odd hours, waking everyone up. He got bolder and bolder over the year and started doing donuts and averages once a week. Not just one round, but take over Tokyo Drift style round and round for a few minutes, and sometimes even comes back for seconds and thirds 5 to 10 minutes apart. There were a few close calls when he almost hit parked cars, so the neighbors park further away now. I have called an emergency line multiple times and each time saying they will come patrol, but zero improvement. After one of many calls, I finally got a nice cop who gave me his name and direct contact and said that he is aware as others have reported it and has the plates to ticket him. One day the car did it again and I snapped. I decided to report each one individually since there was no improvement. Just my luck, the car did his back-to-back donuts about 15 minutes apart. Each time I reported it on the spot so they can hear how loud it is. By the third time, the same lady picked up and said, "Yes, I know, we just spoke," in an annoyed tone. Kind of glad to be honest, so she understands my pain. Later that same day, I got a call from another officer who let me know they towed his car and will be keeping it for a while. I can now finally sleep peacefully and leave my windows open at night. Edit for those skeptical of the legitimacy of my story, when you call and report they ask for your name, address and phone number. So whenever I reported the car, I name drop the officer who gave me his direct line and say Officer XYZ and I are in contact and he knows of the culprit and his plates. I'm also not the only one reporting. Neighbors have video footage sent in with license plates. And yeah guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. And also check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on Spotify, Amazon, Audible and other podcast platforms. You will often find exclusive episodes and early access to new content. Furthermore, please check out my Patreon by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or my YouTube membership program for even more exclusive stories. Thank you so much and I will see you again tomorrow.